Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. I've been doing a series where I've looked at popular and powerful endgame unique items, and today I want to take a look at a chase item of yesteryear. So when patch 3.4 Delve League came out, it introduced a whole bunch of utter junk unique rings. However, these junk unique rings mention one little thing on them, that you could vendor them in certain combinations, and in exchange for them, you would receive a special reward. And that's exactly what Precursor's Emblem is. It is a unique item that is a chase item, very similar in a lot of ways to the Watcher's Eye, but it is something that is actually sourced from a vendor. Ultimately though, Precursor's Emblem should be seen as a reward for killing Aul the Crystal King. When you kill Aul the Crystal King, about 45% of the time you will receive a ring. These rings are all really bad, but they are used in the vendor recipe to make a Precursor's Emblem, and we'll get to the exact mechanics of that as best as I've been able to work it out. There's a couple of things that I'm not 100% certain on the way that they work, but we'll give as much information as we can here. What I've got is based upon watching every video I could find of people turning in Precursor's Emblems, especially when they've done it in bulk. So this is a potentially truly amazing item. To give you an example, these are 4 of the ones that are listed in the Scourge League, and all of these are listed for 200 exalts or more, and all of them might actually sell at those prices. You know, a lot of times people can list something at 200 exalts without it ever selling. You know, it might only be a 5 exalt item, but all of these are genuinely possibly going to sell. So the key thing that they all share in common, with the exception of the last one, is +1 to the maximum frenzy charges. This is a very hard mod to get on rings, very, very powerful, and you can get it for the other 2 charge types as well. Then we have added cold damage per frenzy charge, which is added on all of them. And then we have different other mods. 8% increased evasion rating per frenzy charge. This one here has 5% increased damage per power charge. And this one here has 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on kill. All of these are monstrously big hits. And then we've got this really interesting one here, which is being listed for 5 Mirrors of Calandra. Don't know it'll sell at that. It would have sold at that price a couple of leagues ago when the build that it's for was better, but it's not as good as it was then. And that's the accuracy stacking Juggernaut builds that used to have a few more tools than they do now, but it has this ridiculous 36% increased accuracy rating per frenzy charge. That might not sound like much, but there are builds that scale all of their damage off accuracy, and this is absolutely unquestionably best in slot for that build, and that is a high investment build. And as a result, this would sell in a heartbeat for a mirror. Whether it's going to sell at 5 mirrors or not, I don't know. However, whilst this is a potentially amazing item, it is also usually trash. And here's a couple of examples of complete flops. So coming from a vendor recipe, it is a high variance item. It's like panning for gold in a cesspool. Sometimes you get lucky, you find someone's discarded wedding ring or whatever. Other times though, and usually in fact, you just end up with your hands full of crap. Some examples of true stinkers. Here we've got 6% increased critical strike chance per endurance charge, 10% increased damage per endurance charge, 5% increased max life, 5% increased max energy shield, 20 strength, and 29 fire resistance. No one's going to want to use this. And then over here we've got this 2-stone ring with cold lightning, 20 to dex and int, 5% life and energy shield, 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on kill, 6% increased critical strike chance per frenzy charge, 3% increased energy shield per power charge. Even if you are investing heavily into both power charges and frenzy charges, this one's rubbish on the right, and this one on the left is rubbish even if you're investing heavily in endurance charges. So, the absolute goldmine is getting +1 to a maximum charge on a Precursor's Emblem. So Precursor's Emblems are one of only 2 sources of +1 maximum charge types on rings, with the exception of a couple of uniques, but these are generally much better than the other uniques. And this is the primary reason that people will want this ring, although not quite the only one. And this allows Precursor Emblems to compete with or even surpass synthesized rings that have charge implicits, like this particular monster of a ring. Now this exists in the Standard League, and I cannot find any evidence that you can get both endurance charges and power charges still to this day. Additionally, this came from the divination card Remembrance, rather than directly from the vendor recipe, and that may or may not influence what can roll on it. But this thing is a monster. So it is 4% strength and 6% dexterity as a Val implicit, then 20 to strength and int, 5% max energy shield and life, +1 maximum endurance and power charges, and +1% chance to suppress spell damage per endurance charge. This is the single best Precursor's Emblem I've ever seen, and someone's selling it in standard for multiple mirrors. So there are 3 random mods on the item that aren't totally random. Precursor's emblems will always have a resistance implicit. Whether you get a ruby, sapphire, topaz, 2-stone, or prismatic ring, though, will depend upon the choices that you make, and we'll get to those choices in a little while. They also always have 20 to those attributes that are linked to the resistances. So for instance, if you have a ruby ring, ruby is fire resistance, fire is tied to strength, and so you'll have 20 strength. A cold and fire 2-stone ring will have 20 to strength and dexterity. A prismatic will have 20 to all 3 attributes. Precursor's emblems also always have 5% life and energy shield. Next, they will have charge mods, endurance, frenzy, and or power, which will depend upon the choices that you make when you're doing the vendor recipe, and as well as depending upon the choices you make, it will also depend upon random chance. And getting the top charge mods, including +1 to maximum charges, will require loot from Aul Crystal King to go into the vendor recipe. So there are 3 bosses, 9 components, and 1 recipe. Delve has 3 bosses. Ahutotli the Blind drops Achilles' Mountain, Putembo's Valley, and Uzaza's Meadow. Kurgle drops Achilles' Valley, Putembo's Meadow, and Uzaza's Mountain. And Aul Crystal King drops Achilles' Meadow, Putembo's Mountain, and Uzaza's Valley. Notice that these are really impossible to keep track of which name is which. Really, if you're going to do any serious in messing around with delve mines and gathering of precursor emblems, you are probably going to want to write all of these down and keep them on a sheet of paper near you so that you can keep in mind, which one's which when you find one of these. Now there is a vendor recipe, which is 1 meadow ring, 1 mountain ring, and 1 valley ring is a precursor's emblem, but it's a lot more complicated than that. So Achilles rings relate to fire, strength, and endurance charges. Uzaza rings relate to cold, dexterity, and frenzy charges, and Putembo rings relate to lightning, intelligence, and power charges. And because you need 1 of each landmark, so one meadow, 1 mountain, 1 valley, in the recipe, to get 3 power charge mods, you will need to have 1 Putembo ring from each boss. This tends to be something that's very hard to do in solo self-found, and ultimately Precursor's Emblem is almost exclusively a trade league item as a result. Additionally, the ring that you get will have all of the elemental resistances based upon the combination of rings you vendor. So if you were to vendor 2 Achilles and 1 Uzaza ring in your combination for the vendor recipe, then you will receive a fire and cold 2-stone ring because you've got at least 1 fire and at least 1 cold. If you were to vendor 1 fire and 2 lightning, then you would get a fire and lightning 2-stone ring. If you were to vendor 3 cold rings, then you would get back a sapphire ring. And if you were to vendor 1 of each, then you will receive a prismatic ring. As we said before, that will impact the stats you get as well. So there are different mod pools by boss. Each ring that's used in the vendor recipe contributes 1 charge-related mod to the final product. The mods on the Precursor's emblems appear to be divided into 3 categories. So firstly, we have the tier 3 mods. These are tied to Ahutotli, the boss, and these can be added by a ring that is sourced from any boss. So Ahutotli, Kurgle, or Aul. Any of these rings can give you an Ahutotli or tier 3 mod. The Kurgle mods, are tier 2 ones, are the ones that you can only get by vendoring a Kurgle or Aul ring as part of your combination. And then the Aul ones, the tier 1 mods, can only be added by an Aul ring. Now, all of the very best mods are tier 1, although there are certainly builds that want some of the other ones. And it is worth noting, and we'll get to this in a second when we look at the actual mods themselves, that the tier 2 mods are actually pretty bad. It's an interesting little quirk of the way that these work out, that the tier 1 and tier 3 mods tend to be better, and the tier 2 mods tend to be the worst. But the tier 1 mods are so much better than everything else that they are really what you want. Also, I'm not going to apologize for the puns. I delved deep for these. If they made you feel a bit blue, I hope that you all forgive me. They crystallized in my mind and I had to share them, and I'm not actually sorry. So the tier 3 mods. This is the tier 3 mods as best as I can tell from research. This might have errors, but I believe it to be accurate. Remember that you can get one of these from a ring from any boss. They're mostly unwanted, although the flat damage per charge is good, as is accuracy per frenzy. And you can get multiples of the same mod. So we have 15% chance that if you would gain specific type of charges, you instead gain maximum number of that charges. That mod is fairly good. 20 to 40% increased duration for one charge type tends to be quite bad. 1% increased movement speed per X charge is mediocre without being bad. It's not rubbish, but it's not good. Then we have something that is related to global defenses. 3% increased energy shield, or 8% evasion rating, or 6% increased armor per relevant charge. So power for energy shield, frenzy for evasion rating, and endurance for armor. These mods are pretty bad for most builds, but can have some use. Next, there's flat damage per charge. These mods are good. 5% increased damage per X charge is a fairly good mod. A 10% chance to gain X charge on kill is pretty bad. And then there is 1% increased attacks and cast speed per X charge, which is sort of okay. But interestingly, it is frenzy charges that get something different here. They get 10% increased accuracy rating per frenzy charge in this slot instead. And that mod is actually really good. It's not something that most builds want, but there is a very viable accuracy stacking build that loves Precursor's emblems that roll this mod at least twice. If you can get one that rolls this mod twice, you've got a monster. If you can get one that rolls it 3 times, you've got an absolute beast. Next, we have the tier 2 mods, and as I did say before, these tend to be weaker. I will state that some of this information is out of date. Anything that references dodge is probably wrong. Up-to-date data doesn't really seem to exist anywhere online for these, and unfortunately all of the mass turn-ins I'm aware of Precursor's emblems occurred before the 3.16 overhaul of defenses. Now, these mods are not able to be added by an Ahutotli ring. They are Kurgle or Aul only, and they're also mostly pretty bad. Often you'd rather get a second copy of a tier 3 mod instead of a tier 2. And crit multi per power charge is the real outlier. That mod is good. So we have various things related to defense, like chance to block attack damage per power charge, or endurance charges, or frenzy charges. You can get that for anything. Chance to dodge attack hits per power charge or frenzy charge. That will have changed into spell suppression, and I can see here that I was able to find evidence that it has changed to 1% chance to suppress spell damage per endurance charge. I'm just not sure about the others. And then there's a mixture of other potential mods. 0.3% of life recovered per second per X charge. Gain 1% of X damage as extra chaos damage per X charge. And then there's 6% increased critical strike chance per charge, which is not available for power charges. And there's a couple of other mods as well, but nothing particularly amazing. Just a bunch of different low-end outcomes. The big power comes from the tier 1 mods. These are the ones that you all want. So the while you're at maximum charges mods don't play as well as they sound, in my opinion at least. Things like, for instance, you have mind over matter while at maximum power charges. This sounds really good for builds that actually want to have mind over matter. But what tends to happen is that these fall off at the worst times. So if you're fighting a boss that has a long phase or a long introduction, like for instance, the start of an Azaro fight, you will be without your maximum charges when the boss does its first attacks on you. So it can be something you can manage with if you're someone that knows how to avoid everything the boss does right at the start. But it does tend to be turned off at the worst possible times, even though it's mostly on. And that particularly goes for you have iron reflexes when at maximum frenzy charges, or you cannot be stunned while at maximum endurance charges. These sound fantastic, but they just are not in my experience. However, there's a lot of power in these mods. +1 charges is jackpot time, and the mods that grant you charge recovery on tier 1 are strong. So I mentioned that there's tier 3 versions of charge recovery mods, things like 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on kill. Those are quite weak, but the tier 1 versions are really strong. So 20% chance to gain a power charge on a critical strike, 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on hit, and gain 1 endurance charge per second if you've been hit recently. All of these are really strong. Something that needs to be said here is that if you vendor 2 Aul rings at once, and remember that they will have to be aligned to different elements and therefore aligned to different types of charges, you can actually get, through a lot of luck, you can get 2 different tier 1 mods on an item. There's one example I've seen of an item that had both +1 maximum power charges and +1 maximum endurance charges on it. I'm not sure if that's still possible. I haven't seen any of those exist in the Scourge League. But you can definitely get, say, gain Arcane Surge on hit with spells while at maximum power charges, as well as +1 frenzy charges, or something along those lines. And there's a lot of synergy these days because of the unique item Badge of the Brotherhood. There's a lot of synergy between power charges and frenzy charges, and as a result we see a number of players who will attempt to vendor both the cold and lightning all rings, as well as one of the other rings to finish off the set. So how do you get +1 charges? You need to use an all ring, at least one, and you need to be lucky. There doesn't seem to be any observable bias towards or away from any one specific mod. I think the intention GGG had was that all of the tier 1 mods would be equally sought after. That hasn't actually panned out in reality, but I think that they put them all at the same rarity with the intention that players would then find something cool and stick with it. So there's no observable bias towards or away from any specific mod, although the sample sizes, I will say, of large-scale turn-ins are too small to be able to say this authoritatively. So we've only seen people turn in 60 at a time a few times, and then a bunch of smaller turn-ins where they've turned in 20 or so. The most common and popular turn-in is a straight flush of rings. So what I mean by that is you've got all 3 different types of lightning rings, for example. Doing this appears to give you a 1 in 19 chance to get a +1 charge ring. So that means that all of the mods, I believe all the mods are equally likely to show up on the ring that you vended that was from Aul. So that will give you a 1 in 19 chance to be a +1 charge. And then the other 2 rings that you vended don't have any potential to give you a charge. That's my belief anyway. I could be wrong on that. If you want to experiment with this, Achille rings are pretty cheap in 3.16 as they're somewhat off meta. So if you want to experiment with Ruby Precursor emblems that have 3 endurance charge mods, you can do this fairly easily. Achille rings are hard to buy in anything approaching a reasonable quantity, however, because there's just not that many of them on the market, but you will definitely be able to source them at a reasonably low price. So often players vendor the all cold and all lightning rings, so this is Putembo's Mountain and Uzaza's Valley, plus either Uzaza's Meadow or Putembo's Meadow. This can give you great rings that synergize really well with Badge of the Brotherhood, like we were saying before. Attempting to get a good Precursor's emblem can be very expensive. At this point of the Scourge League, you're looking about 3 exalts for the top rings. This is Putembo's Mountain and Uzaza's Valley. Uzaza's Valley in particular is expensive at the moment. I think Putembo's Mountain's quite a bit less than that. Then the Achilles Meadow from Aul is also, that's pretty cheap. But also one of the other ones, I think it's Uzaza's Meadow, is pretty expensive as well. So all of these turn-ins can start costing you a lot of currency, and you will find people who will gamble away a mirror or more in currency chasing a +1 to a specific type of charges ring that has something else impressive on it as well. Anyways, that's all, folks. I hope you have a bit of fun with Precursor's Emblem. May your Valor's have interesting results, and also don't forget that there is a divination card called Remembrance. Is very hard to find in any quantities. People just get one of them. I think it's something like 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20,000 from stack decks, and also it drops in the all-aligned cities, so the Primeval Ruins, Deep in the Delve, but it's very rare in those too. A set of 8 of them will give you a random Precursor's Emblem, which is usually going to be garbage, but has a tiny, tiny chance to be amazing. So I'm going to leave it there. Have fun, and I will see you around.